Welcome to the Brainbox Podcast. Brainbox is a program of Oklahoma Humanities, a nonprofit organization that brings humanities scholarship to the general public. You can check out the other programs of Oklahoma Humanities at okhumanities.org. I'm your host, Chris Carroll, a program officer at Oklahoma Humanities. Brainbox is a podcast for your noggin. It's meant to challenge our guests to make the humanities relevant to current issues and challenge listeners to use their Brainbox to make better sense of the human experience. We talk to experts in humanities fields like history, philosophy, literature, and ethics who give informed views on the deeper historical and cultural contexts of world events. We encourage you to comment about what you've heard, and you can also find all of our previous episodes by going to our website, okhumanities.org/brainbox. And we're also on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, YouTube, Spotify, and other podcasting libraries. You can email comments and questions to us at brainbox@okhumanities.org. Underwriting support for this episode of Brainbox is provided by The Springer Company, an Oklahoma company specializing in payroll and bookkeeping for small employers, nonprofits, and local government agencies. For more information, visit thespringercompany.com. In this episode, we'll be talking about Woody Guthrie's life and work and his continuing influence on American culture. Woody Guthrie was born in 1912 in Okemah, Oklahoma, and he became one of the most important and influential American musicians of the 20th century. In 1940, John Steinbeck wrote this about him. Woody is just a voice and a guitar. He sings the songs of a people, and I suspect that he is, in a way, that people. Harsh-voiced and nasal, his guitar hanging like a tire iron on a rusty rim, there's nothing sweet about Woody, and there's nothing sweet about the songs he sings. But there is something more important for those who will listen. There's the will of the people to endure and fight against oppression. I think we call this the American spirit. And Bruce Springsteen has said Woody's music is at the core of what it means to be an American, and it gets right to the heart of the promise of what our country is supposed to be about. Our three guests on this episode are folks who are keeping Woody Guthrie's legacy alive. Robert Williams is a native Oklahoman and a retired linguistics professor whose research focuses on the documentation of endangered languages. His PhD dissertation was on the Choctaw language in Oklahoma. Robert is also an acclaimed recording artist based in Berlin, Germany, and he regularly tours with his band, Melvin Touche and the Tom Toms. Robert's first solo album, State Secrets, was named by the Oklahoma Gazette as one of the top 10 albums of the 2000s by an Oklahoma artist. His musical style is a blend of folk, blues, rock, and European cabaret. Robert is a member of the Woody Guthrie Coalition's advisory board, and he's performed and given scholarly presentations at the annual Woody Guthrie Festival in Okemah. Our other two guests are an award-winning musical duo known as the Ricks, Rick Pagliari and Rick Nessler. The Ricks play individually and together in various combinations on guitars, banjos, Native American flute, Ozark mouthbow, and autoharp. They have recorded, performed, and learned from folk music masters like Pete Seeger and Utah Phillips. At this year's Woody Guthrie Festival, Robert Williams and the Ricks presented a program sponsored by Oklahoma Humanities honoring the 100th anniversary of Pete Seeger's birth, and discussing the history of environmental activism in music. The Ricks worked with Pete Seeger for many years on his Clearwater project to clean up and preserve the Hudson River. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to be here. Thank you for having us, Chris.
What are some aspects of Woody's childhood in Okemah that might have influenced his later life and work?
Well, yeah, I think that, of course, growing up in Okemah, that there was had a big effect on Woody because of the family situation, and growing up with his mom, who started showing signs of Huntington's chorea, though they didn't know what that was at the time.
Which is what Woody died from eventually himself, right?
Yeah. And so that, I'm sure that had a big effect on him. And also, he was listening to the sounds of all the people that were here, the oil workers, that were here. And he played a little harmonica on the streets. And, he was kind of, I think even as a young person, he was a freewheeling kind of individual. That's what the kind of stories that I've heard. He was he loved to read. And we were doing a show yesterday over in Okemah at a nursing home, and this woman, she wheeled her wheelchair closer to us, and she said, "I want to tell you guys that my mother went to school with Woody Guthrie."
Wow.
And she sat right next to him. And she said that he was an amazing student, that he actually knew more than most of the kids that were in the classroom. And the teacher really favored Woody and actually gave him extra lessons or so. I mean, everything that you hear about Woody, he was curious. He was a curious kind of a individual all throughout his life. And I'm sure that those early roots and the hard times between, we're talking about one of the things that you associate with Woody Guthrie, unfortunately, is fire. Fire followed Woody throughout his whole life. And fire happened in Okemah. You know, his father got burnt. I think one of his sisters got burnt.
Yeah, his sister died in a fire that may have been started by his mom during an argument.
And that's going back to the Huntingtons. You know, so
I think it was a pretty hard scrabble life in Okemah back then. And back then, Oklahoma this was before Oklahoma became such a conservative state. I think there was a whole progressive movement there. There were members of Congress from here who were not Democrats or Republicans, but from people's parties.
Yeah.
And I think that probably shaped his, caring about the people who work and have to make a living and have a hard time doing it. His whole life was devoted to those people and being among those people. And I think that the nurturing of that community was probably a very nurturing community for him. There's other complex histories about Okemah with race, the black community in Boley and the Indians around there. So we won't get into that. I really can't speak to that. I know that it's not all a rosy situation and not all a real caring community for everybody. It's inclusive. But I think for him it was probably a very nurturing situation for working people, and he really cared about them.
There's a great story I've read recently from his childhood that he and his mom would go to the Crystal Theater, which is still theirs. And
that's where I played my set yesterday there.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's a beautiful little venue there.
It is great. Still a wonderful place.
Apparently he was a big fan of Charlie Chaplin as a kid. And it's actually in Joe Klein's book about Woody Guthrie, A Life. And he talks about how, Charlie Chaplin's iconic character was a tramp who was kind of set apart from society and made fun of bullies and rich people and authority figures. So he kind of draws a little comparison there. That might have been kind of an odd influence, but it really makes sense, I think. So why do you think Woody's known as a wanderer, almost a hobo himself? What made him want to travel the country and experience all that he experienced?
Work.
Yeah.
Work was hard to come by.
Yeah.
And he was a hobo. He wasn't close to being a hobo. He was. He hopped freights. Rick does whole programs on the hobo community. Hobos shouldn't be confused with tramps or various other traveling folks. What is it you say?
They say a hobo works and wanders, a tramp dreams and wanders, and a bum just drinks and wanders. So you never call an old working hobo a bum. It's disrespectful. They were workers. They were itinerant workers who traveled around the country. And of course, we're looking at that time with Woody Guthrie, and you had the dust storm. And the dust storm, of course, it made it very difficult for people to feed their families because there was no money. And at that time, if you were a certain age, you were asked to leave because the families couldn't feed you. And that's how a lot of people, both men and women sometimes, had to go out there and ride the rails. And that's what Woody was doing. But I think he had wanderlust in him from the beginning.
And, I think the three of us can attest to this. And I grew up in Oklahoma City, and I was always interested in the wider world and wanted to get out into it. You get the road in your blood, and it just doesn't leave. And not all our lives we've been out on the road, and I'm sure that's probably what Woody had too.
Well, I was doing an interview with Woody's daughter Nora just a few weeks back, and she said the thing about Woody is that you never knew. He would say, "I'm going to go out and buy a pack of cigarettes," and he wouldn't come back till like 2 weeks. So I think it was a lot more than just the things that we're talking about. There were different kind of situations with the Dust Bowl and all these things that got him out there. But I think he was a wanderer.
Yeah, I do. That's what I think too. I think basically you are or you aren't. It's
You guys mentioned his reading and his curiosity. I've read that he was a great patron of public libraries too.
Oh, definitely.
What were some of the things that you think he read and listened to that influenced him when he began writing songs?
He read
Everything.
He read you know that he was into like mysticism, and there was a time where I think it was in one of the books they talk about that he was even telling fortunes and
yeah. His stepmother was a fortune teller. Right?
Yeah, so he was doing the mystic thing, and I think anything that Woody could learn from. He read all of the great poets, but you remember also that he was an artist. So he was painting signs. I mean, that's what his real job, so to speak, was for a time. He always carried his brushes and stuff, and he would go out to make money. He would paint signs. And Rick, you should tell him about, going to the archive. And Nora, we went this is when the Woody Guthrie archive was still in New York City, in the old Harold Leventhal's, that was his old manager's office. And so Nora gave Rick and I a tour in there. And the first thing she did was she brought out this old 78 that wasn't a Lead Belly album, but it was painted over the top of it that said Lead Belly. Okay? And what happened, Rick, when opened it?
Well, basically, in those days, an album was truly an album, of course. Instead of having one record with 6 cuts on each side, you had 6 records with 1 cut on each side, and they all fit in envelopes, and you opened it like a book. And in those days, they didn't have a lot of advertising on it. All of those envelopes the paper envelopes that held the records were blank. Well, when we're in the archives and Nora hands us this album, we opened it up. First of all, it was from some Broadway show that he deposited all these Lead Belly records in. And he had repainted the whole front of the album, and it said Lead Belly on it. You opened it up, and every one of those envelopes, there wasn't a square inch inside that album. Every envelope, the 2 pieces of cardboard that were the cover and the backside of that, covered with writing. Where he met Lead Belly for the first time, how he felt when he first listened to Lead Belly, how this song made him, appreciate certain aspects of this and that. And, as Nora said, he was probably a compulsive scribbler.
Yeah, wow.
It was just amazing what he had done. And he did that his entire life. He filled up, he'd buy classwork, he'd send somebody a letter, and it would be an entire classwork book. Like you get in 1st and 2nd grade, those cardboard imitation marble things. He would fill up like 48 pages.
That would be
one letter. And then mail it to him. That'd be one letter.
One letter. I mean, it was amazing. And that was the same thing with the instruments. This machine kills fascists. I mean, he would write on things.
His fiddle.
He
what's on his fiddle? I'm not familiar with that.
He had that when he was in the Merchant Marine during World War II. What was it? Sunk twice, drunk once.
Yeah.
Carved right in the top
USS Floyd.
Yeah, USS Floyd. Carved right in the top of the fiddle.
Awesome.
and it said how mmany fascists that it killed.
Oh, wow.
On it. It had a number on there.
But the fiddle killed.
The fiddle killed.
Yeah.
And I think that was the magic of Woody was he was an artist, not just a musician, not, in your normal sense. He was, a visual artist because he did all these different drawings. He was an author. He was a songwriter. And I think that, so when you think of, because we were discussing, Rick and I, as we were driving out here, about, what is the magic of Woody Guthrie, And I think we're talking about the important thing was that before Woody, there was mostly people who sang songs that other people wrote. Tin Pan Alley. They would, you would go over and you would get a song, and you'd write the song. If you're the songwriter, you'd give it, and somebody else would sing it. But Woody was one of those characters who was out there. He wrote his own songs, and he was singing his songs, and he became that symbol of, the traveling troubadour, the traveling balladeer, the guy out on the road with his guitar on his back, with his thumb out on the road, And he inspired legions of other people. You know, like Bob Dylan. I mean, it's hard to say what would have been or not, but there is certainly justification to say that Woody was such a strong presence in what he stood for that he inspired so many musicians all around the world.
I've thought about how he's almost a precursor to the punk rock movement, because he proved you don't have to have a great voice, you don't have to be a great guitar player or harmonica player. If you've got a message, you can get it out there.
Well, as a friend of mine, Fred Gillen, says, all you need is 3 chords and some words.
Yeah.
As long as you put the 3 chords in the right place and you sing the right words, you got a song.
So why do you think his songs were and are so effective and memorable? What is it about them?
We were talking about it. First of all, a lot of them are really simple. The majority of them, 3, 4 chords, nothing, and a lot of them were just melodies lifted wholesale from already familiar songs. He was a big Carter Family fan.
That's important because it gives people already something to latch onto when they hear the song.
It's familiar.
And this has been going on forever. I mean, I think another thing about this song is that, I don't know if you're familiar with the term the folk method, but it's kind of taking things that other people have done and changing them a little bit for the current situation. And the Union Made is a great, great song. It's hard not to sing it. You know, when somebody sings, it's hard not to sing along. Everybody does. But one of the things about Union Made that's interesting is the third verse is not a verse for the Me Too times and the feminist movement. It's talking about being a good union wife.
But he didn't write that.
But everybody's rewriting it. But well, a lot of people sung it.
But Woody didn't write that verse.
He didn't write that verse.
No.
Who wrote it? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't. You know,
Millard Lampell.
Millard Lampell wrote the verse. But
interesting.
But the thing, Chris, because you brought it up, and we're here in Oklahoma City. This is I did a lot of interviews with Pete, and this is one of my favorite stories.
With Pete Seeger?
Yeah, about the creation of Union Made that your listeners would probably enjoy, because it's very interesting. Pete and Woody were out singing for the oil workers in 1940, and they went to Bob and Ina Wood, and they were operating the Union Hall, and they were calling a meeting. And not a lot of they couldn't get babysitters, so they had a lot of women with little babies around, and Pete and Woody were singing, and all of a sudden there was a group of men. These men, they lined up on the back wall, and Bob Wood came over and talked to Pete and Woody and said, "See those men over there? I haven't seen them before. There might be some trouble. You better start singing." So they sang a couple songs, and sure enough, right after they finished the song, one of the guys stepped forward. He walked right over to where they were playing, and he had this big, long trench coat. He opened up the trench coat, and there was a baseball bat in there that he was holding. And he says, "I was sent here by the boss to break up this meeting." He said, "But after listening to you sing, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just singing for workers like all of us." He said, "I'm going to go back to the boss and I'm going to tell him nothing happened." So right before he leaves, he turns around. He says, "But next time I come back, you make sure there's an American flag on that podium." He walks out the door. Ina Wood goes over and she said, "Woody, you see all these women and children here? Without us here, there might have been some really trouble. You know, all you do is write about men. Men this, men that, fellow workers that. When are you going to write a song for the union women?" Well, Woody huffed and puffed, as Pete said, went over to the Union Hall. They had a typewriter there. Woody had a big jug of wine. And Pete was sitting there, and he was listening to Woody was strumming out, and he was writing some stuff, pecking away. And every once in a while, he'd ask, "Pete, how does it sound?" And Pete said, "Oh, it sounds good." Well, Pete fell asleep. He was on the couch. He woke up in the morning, and there was Woody. He was curled up in a ball. The whole bottle of wine was gone, and Union Made was sitting on the typewriter. And so that's how that song came to be. But he only wrote the 2 verses. Yeah. And Mill Lampell later decided that he would take a crack at it.
Oh, so he added it. So now people are taking Mel Lampell's verse and changing it for modern times. And Larry Long did it yesterday and did a brilliant third verse about the women in the Hormel strike. So it was a very feminist take on it. But that's the thing that is great about this music, too, because it lives on and people change it. So it's not just a historic document. It's the things that we live by that we play, and things that get changed and things that get, if they're not relevant wholly to the times we're in, they get made that way. And that's what's great about this music.
Well, there's also the thing that always comes back to me is we're all just links in a chain. And it's about the music. There's a lot of talk about who's a star and who's not, when you're listening to commercial music. But as far as this music goes, I think one of the things that attracted me to it was that it's not based on a star system. Natural stars sort of rise. Like we're sitting here talking about Woody Guthrie. But he didn't become Woody Guthrie to be a star. He became Woody Guthrie to write songs for the people around him and the situations that he saw. And I think that's something that musicians in this line of work have to remember, is that they're just a link in the chain. We're taking stuff that we got from our mentors. Hopefully we can mentor other people on the way and teach them what we know, and then have them add what they pick up and send it on down the line for the next generations.
Is that kind of what you meant by the folk method, Robert?
It is exactly what I meant. It makes these things living documents, not historical artifacts, but the songs are alive, and they stay alive, they stay meaningful because people put themselves into it and take them further along.
I wanted to talk about This Land Is Your Land a little bit later in the episode, but there's an example of that I read recently that I love, that there's a Canadian version. There are versions of This Land Is Your Land in many, many languages, but the Canadian version changes the lyrics from, it's not from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, it's from the Arctic Circle to the Great Lakes waters. Yeah. I love that. There's so many other examples like that, too.
The Tarriers, I think, was the first group to do that.
Oh.
Yeah, and the Scots have in Scotland, they have their own version of it. I think that's the thing about Woody's music is it touched people, and it made all of us feel important, all of us feel worthy, and also I think it made us, as you were talking about, Chris, it was a different voice. It wasn't the perfect voice. It wasn't the fanciest guitar playing. So it gave us the feeling that you too could do this.
We talked a little bit about Robert and I about how Woody became famous and notable. And speaking of his method of using old existing tunes, you had a fascinating story about California, how Woody became famous on the radio in California, because there were so many people who'd moved to California from the Midwest and the South, who knew these tunes. What's the story behind that? Well,
I just think that exactly what you said is not much of a story. He came out there when he was on the radio, and there were lots of transplanted people. Los Angeles, as most people know, Los Angeles County has 88 municipalities. LA is just one. And those things were populated by immigrants from different places. For example, Long Beach was populated in the beginning by people from Iowa. Up until recently, they've had an Iowa family picnic in Long Beach that celebrates that history. And there was a lot of people who came out there from the Dust Bowl and for different reasons in California, and he had that audience from home. It wasn't the people in Hollywood who were listening to him necessarily. Not that they weren't, but he had his audience there, and he was speaking to them. And later on, the war brought out all kinds of people to L.A. to work in the armaments factories, but L.A. is a town of immigrants from different places, and that's why that's how he resonated there.
And the people believed in him when they heard his voice.
They did.
So much that they would they didn't have much money, and they would slip a little money in an envelope and send it to the radio station. And, so he was really, that was the voice, that comforting voice. And they felt that, he was from Oklahoma. They're from Oklahoma. They're out there on the road struggling. They figured that Woody needed a little bit of money too. Yeah. And they were sending money into the radios.
Yeah. Well, I think Woody, also his audience was a very oppressed audience. These were Okies. Nobody wanted them out there. So that was a voice for them, a gathering of community around him, and very important.
And when he worked at that radio station, Bob, that there was, at first he was out there, with Lefty Lou and also his cousin Jack. Jack Guthrie, they wrote together Oklahoma Hills. And, and he was sort of like the side guy. He was almost like a comedian, where Jack was the one who was, because Jack really wanted to be a cowboy star. And Woody tried, but Woody wasn't good with horses. And they used to go to these rodeos, and Woody would get on a horse and sometimes ride the horse to the crowd. But Woody had some kind of magic that because Jack Guthrie went on to chase his dream. He did play at the Grand Ole Opry, with Ernest Tubb, Jack Guthrie, and Woody was with Lefty Lou, and then they went and they had a radio show down in L.A. and it was this guy Ed Robin, who was also on the same radio station, who first brought Woody out to see the migrant workers. So he was, that was his first kind of real introduction to, about seeing the migrant workers, and it really inspired him a lot. Did you ever read about that guy? There's a wonderful book.
No, I didn't.
About Woody and me. So that was a part of his education. I think that's how he met with Will Geer.
Yeah.
And he kind of encouraged Woody to approach this as a journalist, right? Like document what's happening in these migrant camps.
Yeah, he was called a lone wolf. He was out there. He had his little nickname kind of thing going out there, and he was out there visiting and learning and singing for the migrant workers.
We talked a little bit about the star system in music before, and so Woody has some very prominent disciples like Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen, and both those guys have talked about how they have crafted their own personas. Like Bob Dylan has worn a white face and talked about how you can't trust anybody who's not wearing a mask because you can only tell the truth when you're wearing a mask. And Springsteen has talked about how he's this voice of the workers, but he's never worked a day in his life. He's never been a factory worker. This is just his persona. So I'm curious about Woody's persona as a wandering hobo or a hillbilly. How much do you think of that was really genuine, but what versus what he was really like as a person?
He was a hobo. I mean, there was no doubt about that.
I mean, it's hard to say exactly how much of it was crafted and how much wasn't, especially by the time he got to New York.
Yeah.
And started hanging around with people there.
Which is after his time in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Right?
He'd had a radio show in Los Angeles, and I think he'd had the radio show in Mexico at that point, too.
Yeah, yeah.
And, he was on national radio.
That's right.
And the station down in Mexico said you could pick it up on barbed wire fences in Minnesota.
Yeah. A hot signal down there.
Hot signal, because they had no laws about how big a signal they could send out. Yeah. But by the time he got to New York, all of these city billies that were, really interested in the folk music and the folk process, he hit town and he just blew the lid off the whole scene.
Yeah. Which was 1940, around 1940.
Yeah, it was 1940, just before World War II.
Yeah, that was the day.
He blew the top off the whole scene because he was authentic. Now, some of it, he was also he admired Will Geer, Will Rogers.
Will Rogers.
So there were certain aspects, he stole little bits from Will Rogers and also Will's philosophy and
So he appeared authentic.
Yeah. So there were. I mean, any performer steals little bits from here and there.
Well, it was that 1940 appearance of Will Geer had brought a show to New York City, and that was the first time that they say this is when folk music, as we know it, really took a big jump because there was, Alan Lomax. It was Hughie Ledbetter, or Leadbelly was there. And Pete Seeger was Pete's very first performance. He wasn't on the bill. Pete wasn't on the bill. But he played one banjo songs. He said, I played it too fast. He played John Hardy. He said, I got a smattering of applause. But Woody stole the show. I mean, because, this is something that Rick and I were talking about. Because the left, the people who were the progressive thinkers, what they were hoping for a long time was what they called a Shakespeare in overalls. They wanted someone from the common people who could deliver that message. And here came Woody Guthrie, and he was exactly what they were looking for. And that's why, Alan Lomax was so excited when he first met Woody that he brought him right down to the Library of Congress and recorded some of those things. And his career just took off. I mean, you think of that. In 1940, it went from him stumbling into town, doing this show, and before you know it, he had he was getting paid a lot of money in New York City to do that radio show. Because people were asking me, they asked me to do this little research project about, well, why didn't Woody become, was a country singer? Did he ever play in Nashville? And I'm thinking, well, why didn't? Yeah, maybe he played in Nashville. So I was calling everybody that I could think of that might have known. And I talked to some folks in Nashville, and they said Woody didn't need Nashville because he was on a big time radio station where Nashville at that time in 1940s was nothing. And Woody was getting fan mail, believe it or not, from A.P. Carter. I mean, so when he was down in Mexico, he had gotten, because of Rose Maddox. Rose Maddox recorded The Philadelphia Lawyer. I think it was one of the first songs that was recorded. Yeah. And so she was bringing Woody's music to country music. Jack Guthrie was bringing Woody's music to country. But as far as, when I asked Pete Seeger about it, he goes, we weren't interested in country music. He said, well, we got all of our songs from the Library of Congress. And Woody would call the cowboy clothes peddlers into the country music. He just, after he kind of went in a different direction, and they didn't look towards Nashville or any kind of commercial music.
You guys knew Pete Seeger well, obviously. What was the relationship like between Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger?
Well, I think it was interesting because in the beginning, Woody was the mentor.
Woody, when they did their first tour, the Almanac Trail that Rick was talking about earlier.
In the early 40s, right?
Yeah, 41. Pete
was 21 years old, but Woody was the old man in the group. There was four guys in the group, and he was the old man at 27. So they all looked up to him to a certain degree. Pete especially, though, I think, was because Woody just picked this guy out. Pete had a natural ear, and he could play several styles of banjo, and he was working on mending them all into his own style. Woody picked up on that right away, and Pete said, I could follow just about anything he did. He couldn't fool me, and he didn't want to fool me. He was just, he wanted me to play with him all the time, and I wanted to play with him all the time.
And the early projects that they did together, they started writing a book called Hard-Hitting Songs for Hard-Hit People. That was one of the first kind of collaborative things, and then once again, it was Alan Lomax that asked them, because, Pete Seeger was an intern at the Library of Congress, because he came from a very musical family. His father was a musicologist, and so he was working as an intern collecting the songs, and he was the one who was transcribing all the songs. And so that's what he was doing. He was going out collecting all these labor songs, and then Woody was writing about the songs. So that was what Woody was doing. And it was when Lee Hayes came around, he was collecting also labor songs, and he came to New York looking for a publisher, and he met with Pete, and Pete said, "Why write two books? We can work on one together." So that's when they started singing together, Lee Hayes and Pete Seeger first, and that later became the Almanacs, and they invited Woody in. So the Almanac Singers was important because it was the real band that Woody and Pete worked together. They wrote songs together. It was a very communal effort. They lived together in the Almanac house. And so that was the, I guess, what you would call that moment where Pete and Woody really had that special relationship. But Woody was encouraging Pete to travel across the country, and so that's Pete started traveling. The first time he hopped on the train, he hopped on a train on the siding, and it went back and forth all night long, but it never went anywhere. But I think that so Pete got that inspiration for Woody as the wanderer, as the creator, and he wanted to do that kind of thing. And then when they started collaborating together in Almanac Singers, and what they did in the almanacs was they were writing songs about contemporary issues, about these kinds of things that were political. So that was different. That was a different kind of thing. So unlike the successful band of the Weavers that Pete became, that was a big successful thing.
Commercial.
Yeah. Pete looked back at the end of his life when I was talking to him. He really liked the fact that the Almanac Singers was the band that he was proud of because he was singing the kind of music that he felt was important.
What was Woody's relationship with the Communist Party, do you think?
Well, if it was on Facebook, it would have been, it's complicated. Woody was never a member of the Communist Party, but they were more than happy to have him write for the Daily Worker. Because he communicated with the potential new party members. He wrote about things that the common men and the common women were worried about. He had been on the bottom end of the economic ladder almost his entire life. I've never been a red, but I've been in the red all my life. So they were more than happy to have him, and he was, again, as an artist, he was also a cartoonist. So he was a political cartoonist, and they'd be more than happy to distribute both his columns and his cartoons. But he never actually became a party member.
So what is the context of him putting "This machine kills fascists" on his guitar? This message that he scrawled on his guitar.
Well, World War II.
Yeah, there's this story that is I like stories, Chris. I'm sorry, I have this problem about telling
That's
stories.
Great. No, thank you.
But he was doing some fundraising when the war started out against the fascists, right? So he was doing that, and he was with Sonny Terry. He was with Sonny Terry, harmonica player, and with Brownie McGee. So this, it was basically an interracial kind of group that back in that time. Now they went in there and they're playing, and they get a big applause, and they came over and said, "Oh, Mr. Guthrie, we're so happy that you're here. We have a nice table for you right here to join us, and we set up a little table for your friends out in the kitchen." Woody said, "What do you mean? We just played music for you. We're good enough to play music for you, but we can't sit together." And he walked over. I'm not joking. He picked up the table, boom, turned it over. All the glasses and the silverware and everything went flying. And he said, "This war against fascism is going to start right now." He flipped all the tables over. He grabbed a couple of bottles of wine. He said, "Let's get out of here."
And some silverware.
That's a true story. So, that's one of the stories that Nora Guthrie was talking about. She said, Woody was a scrapper, I mean, if he's telling you something that he's against fascism, he means it. He's not just, using that as a catch-all phrase.
The best thing I saw, I live in Los Angeles most of the year, have a favorite coffee shop I go to every morning that's by USC, and I was sitting there one day, and this young woman sat down across from me at this communal table and opened up her laptop, and on the outside of the laptop it said, "This machine kills fascists." And I went, "Oh man, this is great."
That's awesome.
And I said, "You know where it comes from?" She said, "Oh yeah." But she was doing it with her typewriter instead of his guitar, which I thought was really cool.
And it's emblazoned on the side of the Woody Guthrie Center in Tulsa.
Yes,
too,
it is.
Which is the archive you were mentioning, you referenced earlier. It used to be in New York, now it's in Tulsa, right?
Rick is a primary source.
Yeah. I think that it's so important, when we look at when I was doing this project about the Almanac Singers, I did research when it was there was a short period right before it went to Tulsa that it was actually in Mount Kisco, New York, where, Nora Guthrie lives. And so I went there, and I only had one day because they were packing up everything. I had one day to go into the archives and to read all the letters from Woody and Pete and all the people connected to the Almanac Singers. And I'm telling you, that is an experience that is, and it's available for people to do. Scholars like Robert could go in there and go and get sign the papers to get the researching certification to go in there, because it's a very intensive thing. I mean, when Rick and I were there, it was like rolling out the red carpet for the guests.
The best thing that happened, Nora, one of the things she pulled out was this, this little telephone book. People don't use them much these days because they have iPhones, but you used to have to keep everybody's phone number in a little thing and it fits in your pocket. Well, Woody used to keep his in his back pocket. So Nora had it. And it had like Leadbelly's phone number in it, and Pete, and their addresses where they lived in New York at the time. But it was all curled up.
She said.
And we're looking at it, and she goes, "And you know what the best thing is about this?" And we said, "Oh, what?" She goes, "This is Woody Guthrie's butt print right here."
This is the closest you're going to get to Woody.
This is the closest you're ever going to get to Woody.
Like a death mask of Lincoln.
But it is something that I think, especially folks here in Oklahoma who live close to Tulsa, who are thinking about doing research, this is something that's available to you, and it's something that, if nothing else, you should go over and look at the Woody Guthrie Center, look at all of the exhibits there, and then if you get inspired, you can go to the next step and actually do the research.
The exhibits are fascinating. Actually, Oklahoma Humanities sponsored gave some money for an exhibit that's a virtual reality headset that you can put on, and
I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, it recreates the experience of being in a dust storm, like the 1935, the one that Woody experienced in Pampa, Texas, in 1935. It feels so real. It's really an amazing exhibit.
I think I was there. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
We've talked about this kind of 1940s era. I really wanted to ask about Woody's experiences serving in the Merchant Marine in World War II. There's so many great stories connected to that part of his life. Do you have any particular favorite?
Yeah, they were under attack. The convoy was under attack, and they were being bombed. And the troops were all kept, the Army troops were all kept down below decks in the holds, because basically the troop ships they were on were actually freighters.
And these were ships transporting troops for D-Day, for the D-Day invasion.
And they had all of these soldiers down below decks. Well, Woody went down there with his guitar and a couple of his friends, Jim Longy and Cisco, and they started singing songs to chill the troops out, because you can imagine you're inside this big tin can, basically. You can't see out. You don't know what's going on. And all you can hear is these bombs going off all over the place. And you don't know when one is going to have your number on it. So they went down there and they figured, we'll boost their morale a bit. We'll be singing. So they went down there and they sang for quite a while. And they took a break. And when they took a break, they heard coming out from another bay in the freighter, they heard these black guys singing spirituals. So they decided to go in there and see what was going on. So they go in there, and they're in the head. Great acoustics. What better place to be singing? And these guys are sounding great. Singing dynamite. So Woody and Cisco, Jim, they go, "Come on with us. We're going to go sing in there again." So they go back to singing there. One of the officers said, "Hey, you guys can't be in here." And again, Woody took their side and said, "Wait a minute. We're coming in here to sing for you guys." And if you're not going to let these guys sing, we're not going to sing either. They go, wait a minute. You guys got to keep singing. Hey, listen, if these guys can't sing with us, we're done. They sang.
They sang together, and once again, that shows how Woody was able to, with his music, to unite people from all different races to come together, that he had respect for everyone. And he didn't talk about it, he lived it. And he was willing to put his head on the block to continue to, live what he spoke.
And that story is told in a really amazing book, Woody, Cisco, and Me by Jim Longy, the third member of that group of guys who were serving in the Merchant Marine on that ship. So, like a lot of people, I learned, probably my first exposure to Woody Guthrie was learning This Land Is Your Land in kindergarten, actually. It was sung during the morning announcements when I was in kindergarten, growing up in Florida. But there are several verses we didn't learn and didn't sing. Can you talk about how that song evolved? I think out of Woody's annoyance with another with another popular song at the time.
The story that I've heard is an interesting story because he was annoyed by the God Bless America song because that wasn't his people. That was he was thinking about his people that, they didn't have any place to go but underneath a bridge. They're living underneath a bridge, or they're out, homeless people. And it wasn't the beautiful God Bless America kind of thing. And so he was thinking about that, and he was hitchhiking east. And the story that I heard was that he was coming out. He went out to Pittsburgh. He was out near Pittsburgh, and he got caught in a terrible snowstorm. And a ranger, like a forest ranger, found Woody on the side. He was basically frozen, and they brought him into a little shack and kind of nurtured him till he got well again. And while he was in there, he was thinking of a lot of these images that he was experiencing as he was hitchhiking across the country. And he got over into New York City, and I think it was the Hanover House? Yeah, the Hanover House. And that one day he wrote 3 songs. So he wrote a song about women's hats, right? He wrote another song about Red Sox, and that was about 2 Army buddies. And one of the Army buddies wore red socks. And he got hurt in action, but his buddy found him because of the red socks and rescued him. And then he wrote This Land Is Your Land. And it had a different kind of a title on it at first.
Well, God Blessed America for You and Me.
Yeah.
Rather than just God Bless America. It was God Blessed America for You and Me. But with a question mark, wasn't it?
No.
And you can, in one of the rewrites, you can see he actually crossed that out. He said, no, that's not going to work. And that's when he came up with the chorus, This Land Is Made for You and Me. And the interesting thing about that is, for me anyway, about that song was that it ended up being published first in children's books, school kids' books. Pete used to say all the time, this song was never a big hit on the radio, never had, but it's known by every school kid in the country. They even make up their own parodies about it. But it was only the first 3 verses that made it into the school books. They left all the other verses out, and there was a good, probably half a dozen verses that he also wrote. Verses about bankers and trespassing and things like that. Great verses, but they never got published in the books for the longest time. And they even went unrecorded for the longest time. As a matter of fact, Woody never did record the other verses, though we know he wrote them and we know he sang them. Those verses were left out of any kind of publication or any kind of recording. And it wasn't until Arlo actually did a version where they took one of the original versions of him singing the first 3 verses, and then Arlo cut interspersed the other lyrics.
His son, Arlo Guthrie.
Yeah, and then also sang along with the chorus.
Oh wow!
So it was an interesting thing because it actually included all of the quote unquote new verses, and other people wrote verses. For Peter, Paul, and Mary wrote a verse. Pete wrote a verse, and they've all become part of the lexicon at this point.
And one of the other interesting things that we learned just recently was that the publishing company at that time, they took a chance, and they said you can publish this song to all of these different books and stuff for a penny.
Huh.
So to get it into as many books as possible, and I think that it's shows you the strength of that song, that it's known by, you go out to a school, I just played a show back where I live in Vermont, and I'm up on stage, I'm singing that song, and you can see all these young school kids, they're all singing, they know the words. It is it's kind of the unofficial anthem of our country.
I would say it's the true anthem of our country.
Yeah. Well, I mean unofficial in the best way.
Yeah.
Well, Pete used to say that one of the worst things could ever happen to a song is have it approved. And then made it, what was it? To be actually made an actual anthem, to be declared an anthem.
Yeah. I agree.
Because right after that, it becomes propaganda. So...
Yeah, one of those verses that does not get sung or taught to school children kind of illustrates the context that he was writing in. And it goes, "In the squares of the city, in the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I've seen my people. As they stood there hungry, I stood there asking, is this land made for you and me?"
Yep, that's one of them.
What are some other key songs that listeners should check out by Woody that might give you a sense of what he was all about?
I have a great story about Do Re Mi.
Oh, okay.
Which is one of my most favorite songs of his. It's a very catchy song. I was playing in the state of Saxony in Germany, in a little town north of Leipzig called Delitzsch, in a little bar in the old town, and there was a big crowd there. And my partner Ron and I did Do Re Mi, and about halfway, nobody in there spoke English, by the way. We speak to them in German, we sing in English. About halfway through Do Re Mi, I realized the crowd was singing along. They knew all the lyrics. And what it was the East German government had made Woody into a kind of heroic figure because they thought he was establishment in America, and they had taught all these people the songs. So the people at the bar, where they were in their 40s and 50s and had been in school in the communist era in the East the German Democratic Republic, and they knew a lot of Woody Guthrie. But I was shocked. They were singing, and I got enthusiastic and said, "Oh man, I'm going to buy you all a beer." And then I went, "Oh no,
that's the wrong thing to say in a bar in Germany."
Yeah, right.
One of the things that I think that's important to say is Woody's music is timeless. So that you look at the song "I Ain't Got No Home," that could be written today about all of the migrants that are at the borders being locked up,
and homeless people in Los Angeles.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. The songs. The beautiful songs like "Pastures of Plenty." Those are the gems that that endure. Generation after generation finds inspiration. And
I wanted to ask one last question. You guys come to Oklahoma annually and play at the Woody Guthrie Festival. Do you have any sense of how attitudes have changed in Oklahoma about Woody Guthrie over the decades, if they have changed? Well, and kind of what the vibe in Okemah is. Do they celebrate their native son?
Well, this is the first time that we're actually playing here.
This is the first time I've played it.
Okay.
Yeah, I visited here.
Okay.
I visited.
Rick has been here a number of times.
In the early days when I would come here, no one would talk about Woody. They didn't. If you would mention his name, they wouldn't talk to you. It was that, and that was back. I was traveling around in the early 1990s. I was coming through Okemah, and I had just heard about Larry Long around that time and the good work that he was doing. And Larry is the one that should be given the applause for making this happen. And Robert, you just talked with Larry. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this as an Oklahoman, and I have been coming to the Woody Festival for quite a while. The Woody Guthrie Festival itself is responsible for bringing a lot of pride about Woody to the people of Oklahoma. There are so many musicians that people like, and they know that we're progressive and that we're Woody people, and that's helped change a lot of minds. Larry Long came in the 80s to Okemah. He moved there to organize and to bring Woody home, and he, at the time, he told me yesterday that there were people in Okemah who just thought Woody was a communist, but Woody's name was on the water tower when he got there. So somehow that got there. But there were two men in Okemah, a banker and a mortician, who were very powerful, who were leftover McCarthyites, anti-communist. And they were, fighting tooth and nail to keep anything about Woody off of Okemah. But it turns out that when Larry Long got there, and he had a friend who lived in Okemah, talked to a lot of people, and they said, well, Woody was a good person. His family were good people. So these two powerful guys sort of were responsible for some attitudes that people really didn't have. So Larry went out and he got the children of Okemah to research Woody and to go talk to their families about their history in Okemah. And he got them back in to write songs and had a concert that was in Tulsa. And all the kids and their families came in a caravan of cars to Tulsa. So the children won their parents over. And eventually, when these two guys tried to introduce a motion to the city council that they take his name down, nobody voted for it. But one of these men, the banker, in the first 2 or 3 years of the Woody Guthrie Festival, he would put signs in the windows of the bank downtown and other store windows that just said Woody was a communist. And he eventually stopped this active harassment of the festival. But things have changed a lot in Oklahoma. I ran away from home here in 1970, but I'm a third-generation graduate at University of Oklahoma, Court of Chickasaw. The other part of my family were land-run people. So I have some claim to this place. And it still bothers me politically, what goes on here. It's just not my scene. But things are a lot better, and I think people have more pride in Woody Guthrie and their history. Oklahoma City especially has a history of tearing its history down. When you look at Stanley Draper and the urban renewal era, where they tore down the Black Hotel, they tore down all these historic places downtown. But I think things are changing a little bit with that, and I think that Larry Long, but also the Woody Guthrie Festival, have a lot to do with that.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming and talking about Woody Guthrie. Would you have time to play maybe one of your songs that was influenced by Woody or Pete?
I don't know. What do you think there, Rico?
This is the history of the Hudson River in about 4.5 minutes. Once the sachems told a story about a land the Great Spirit blessed, and the people followed the legend from the great waters in the west. They stopped where they found that the fishing was good, earth it was fertile, and game ran in the woods. And now I could be happy just spending my days on the river that flows both ways. I could be happy just spending my days on a river that flows both ways. First came the trappers, then the traders, their own fortunes for to find, and the valley treated them kindly, so the farmers they followed close behind. Then the sloop sailed well laden round the Battery. Flour from Yonkers, furs from Albany. And I could be happy just spending my days on a river that flows both ways. I could be happy just spending my days on a river that flows both ways. Writers and painters have shown its beauty in its waters and on the shore, while musicians seek its praises, seek alive the river's lore. The sunset golden or the Palisades, afternoon ends and then the daylight fades, and now I could be happy just spending my days on a river that flows both ways. I could be happy just spending my days on the river that flows both ways. Maybe it's the moonshine, maybe it's the starlight reflected in Haverstraw Bay. Maybe it's the fog that rolls off the highlands at the break of a brand new day. But apple cider and pumpkins, strawberries and corn make the people of the river glad they were born. And now I could be happy just spending my days on a river that flows both ways. I could be happy just spending my days on a river that flows both ways. Once more, I could be happy just spending my days on a river that flows both ways.
Thank you so much, guys. That was awesome. That's our first song we've ever had on this podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that is a Grammy-winning song. I'm told that is a Grammy-winning song.
Yes.
Right?
Well, yeah, it was. Pete recorded a song, recorded an album called Tomorrow's Children with a bunch of local school kids from Beacon. And it actually won a Grammy in the family category. And because I was on the album and I wrote the song, I got a Grammy too. But it cost me $50. And they won't send me a statue. They'll only send me a parchment.
Oh.
But it is, hand calligraphed. So,
Well, thank you again. Is there anything you guys would like to plug about your work? Or...
Well, we do have a new album.
Oh, awesome. Tell us about it.
And this is a special album that we just did. It's called Steering Pete's Course, Maritime Songs from the Seeger Song Bag. And the reason that we decided to do this when Pete first died, it's been 5 years now, Pete was the kind of entertainer that he made a place for himself in a lot of us. So he became a part of us. He lived with us. It was a concert that you remember, or there was some kind of activity or some kind of meeting that you had. And when Pete passed away, there was almost like you had a little hole in your heart. And everybody was looking for a way to fill that hole. We wanted to know that the singing would continue, that the kind of things that the seeds that Pete had planted would continue to grow. Well, Rico and I were doing a lot of tribute things, but Chris, it wasn't an easy thing to do, to be honest with you. We did it because he was our friend, and we did it because we loved him, but it wasn't an easy thing. And there was no way that we could really do this kind of a recording until some time had passed. So now, with 5 years, I think it's time that we know that all the good things that Pete has taught us continue. The seeds that he planted continue to grow. And people kept saying, well, when are you guys, you're not getting any younger. So when are you guys going to, record an album? And so we decided to honor Pete in this special way with maritime songs. And Rick, why don't you tell them, how we selected people who were going to play on it?
Well, there were a number of things we wanted to take. First of all, we didn't want to do another Pete's greatest hit songs. There's a lot of good versions of Where Have All the Flowers Gone and the Hammer song. We don't really have anything more that would be better or worse at this point. So we decided one of the things that had inspired Rick to do the Almanac Trail was the fact that Pete felt that those songs from the Almanac Singers had been overlooked, and he felt that way about some of his more contemporary songs. So we wanted to do some of his lesser-known songs, and we wanted to focus, and since Rick and I both met Pete being involved with Clearwater, which was a 106-foot gaff rig sloop, big old wooden boat, we decided, well, let's just go with the maritime theme. So we went with the maritime theme. So we chose some old traditional songs. There's a shanty on there, Blow the Man Down. There's a number of other traditional songs, but about half of the album is songs that Pete wrote.
Well, thank you guys again. It's been awesome having you here.
Well, thank you.
It's been a real pleasure.
All right.
Well, and thanks to Richard over here, who without Richard's help, I'm sure
none of this would have been accomplished.
Real work, yeah. Yes. Well, we encourage you to comment about what you've heard on the Brainbox podcast. You can leave comments through the Podbean app and the okhumanities.org/Brainbox website, and on social media by using the hashtag BrainboxOK. Please give us a rating, and you can also email comments and ideas for future episodes to us at brainbox@okhumanities.org. Thank you to Blacken Studios. You can find out more about Blacken Studios at blackenstudio.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our theme music was composed by Lauren Nixon, and this program is funded by Oklahoma Humanities. Any views expressed in the podcast do not necessarily represent those of Oklahoma Humanities or our underwriters. And this has been Brainbox, a podcast for your noggin.